So, um, imagine you're flipping through a family photo album. The recent stuff is crystal clear, high definition, full color. You see your parents, your grandparents.
Yeah, and you know exactly who everyone is.
Right. But as you turn the pages back, the images start to degrade. By the time you get to the great-great-grandparents, the edges are blurry, the faces are familiar, you can see the family resemblance in the eyes or the jaw, but you can't quite tell who is who.
That is actually the perfect analogy for the Middle Pleistocene. It's
Yeah.
this foggy section of the human family tree where the distinct lines of us and them really start to bleed together.
And sitting right in the center of that fog is perhaps the most mysterious and debated character in our history, Homo heidelbergensis.
Or Heidelberg man. And depending on who you ask, they are either the direct ancestor of modern humans, a completely distinct species, or a scientific mistake that never actually existed in the first place.
But regardless of the label, this deep dive is all about the moment in history where the human spark really catches fire. We're going to be pulling from excavation reports, archaeological studies, and some seriously heated academic debates to explore this possible ancestor. Because we aren't just talking about upright walking anymore.
No, not at all.
We're talking about the first true apex predators, the first ballistic weapons, and maybe even the first stirrings of art and language. Our mission today is to figure out if this Heidelberg man is a stranger or if we're just looking at a blurry early version of ourselves.
And it's a detective story that starts, oddly enough, with a single bone in a German sandpit.
Yeah, let's set the scene for that. It's 1907, a village called Mauer near Heidelberg, Germany. And this isn't, a pristine archaeological dig with tiny brushes and grid lines.
Right, it's an industrial work site.
Exactly. Workers are digging through heavy sediment, probably freezing, just trying to get through their shift.
And an industrial worker spots something jutting out of the rock face. He pulls it loose and realizes he's holding this massive mandible, a jawbone. He brings it to the local anthropologist, Otto Schoensack, and almost immediately the confusion just sets in.
Because it completely broke the rules.
Right.
Physically, the jaw was huge, bulky, far bigger than a modern human's. It lacked a chin entirely, which is a very archaic, primitive trait.
With the teeth.
Right. The teeth were shockingly human, small canines, very little wear. It didn't make sense.
It was a total paradox. You have this brutish, archaic bone structure holding these delicate modern teeth. It actually led the anthropologist William Strauss to famously declare later on, he said, while the skull is the creation of God, the jaw is the work of the devil.
Which just highlights the headache it caused for everyone. It was the Frankenstein fossil. And for decades, that one jaw was pretty much all we had to go on.
Yeah, but thankfully the map has filled in since then. We've found skulls and partial skeletons in Ethiopia, Zambia, Greece, France, even China. We're looking at a species that lived from about 700,000 years ago down to 200,000 years ago.
So they were everywhere. That geographic spread across Africa and Eurasia tells you this wasn't just some tiny niche population. They were highly successful.
Extremely successful.
So if we strip away the whole caveman stereotype and just look at the physical profile, what are we dealing with? Like, if I bumped into a Heidelberg man on the street today, am I running away or am I offering him a cup of coffee?
You're probably doing a double take, but you aren't running away. If you look at their facial features, particularly the nasal openings, they were vertical. That is a distinctly human trait, unlike the flatter noses of older ancestors like Australopithecines.
And the brain case was getting big.
Yes, growing rapidly compared to older species. They had these very prominent brow ridges, but the cranial capacity was a massive jump forward.
But the body type was pretty intense, right? I read they were significantly taller than earlier hominins. Males averaged around 5'7" to 5'10", and females were around 5'2" to 5'7".
Right, but it's not just the height. They were stocky, barrel-shaped bodies, incredibly thick leg bones, broad pelvises.
Which makes sense when you think about where they were living. They were adapting to the cold.
Exactly. It's an adaptation to the harsh, cooler climates of northern Eurasia. They were built for freezing temperatures and immense physical endurance. It's very similar to the biological adaptations we see later with the Neanderthals.
And that similarity is exactly why this whole subject gets so complicated. Which brings us to a phrase I love from the sources, the muddle in the middle.
Ah, the muddle in the middle, a classic paleoanthropology term.
It sounds like a reality TV show, but it's this incredible, frustrating scientific problem. We have this specific window, the Middle Pleistocene epoch, where the fossil record is just chaotic.
Because evolution is messy. It's not a straight line where one species clocks out and the next one clocks in. It's a gradient. And Heidelbergensis sits right in the blurry center of that gradient. which has led to a literal century of scientists fighting over what to call them.
The great war between the lumpers and the splitters.
The eternal battle. So on one side, you have the lumpers. Back in the 1950s, the anthropologist Ernst Mayr tried to just simplify human evolution into three neat stages. He essentially erased the name Heidelbergensis, lumping them into Homo erectus. He made the name obsolete for a while.
Just shoving the confusing puzzle pieces into whatever box was open.
Pretty much. But then the splitters fought back. Researchers like Francis Clark Howell and Chris Stringer worked hard to revive the name. They argued you can't just ignore the very clear evolutionary differences from erectus.
So they brought the name back. But the fight is definitely not over. Even today, you have modern scientists like Jeffrey H. Schwartz and Ian Tattersall who want everything from Middle Pleistocene Europe and Asia to be classified as Heidelbergensis. But then, and this blew my mind in the reading, there's this new wipeout theory.
Right, the proposal by Mariana Roxandic and her team.
Yeah. They essentially want to delete the name entirely again. They argue the term has become a catch-all for confusing ancestors.
The trash can taxon, yeah.
Exactly. So they suggest reclassifying all the European specimens as early Neanderthals and taking all the African specimens and renaming them Homo boduensis.
It just shows how hard it is to tell where one species ends and another begins during this time. But whether you call them Heidelbergensis or Bodoensis or just early humans, the way they lived is what really sets them apart.
Right, let's pivot to how they lived, because the biology might be a muddle, but their lifestyle was a revolution. This is the era where our ancestors stopped just scavenging and became the boss. They were the first humans to be strictly carnivorous, omnivorous apex predators.
They weren't waiting around for a lion to leave some scraps. They were hunting big game.
And not just deer or wild boars, though they hunted those too, along with ibex and horses.
Right.
But the standout detail is the megafauna. They were actively hunting straight-tusked elephants and rhinoceroses.
Just pause and think about the logistics of that for a second. An elephant from that era is colossal. You cannot take that down with brute force.
You can't just run up and poke it with a sharp stick. You would die immediately.
Right. It requires elaborate planning and deep cooperation. The strategy they likely used was terrain-based. We find these massive kill sites near ancient swamps or marshes. The theory is they would coordinate to herd these multi-ton animals into the mud.
Trap them in the swamp so they can't move.
Exactly. Once it's bogged down, the group attacks.
But eating all that meat actually comes with a massive biological risk, doesn't it?
Oh?
Protein poisoning?
Yes, often called rabbit starvation. If you eat a diet that is too high in lean meat and lacking in fat and carbs, your liver can't process the ammonia. It can actually be fatal.
So how did they survive that, if they were these apex predators?
Because they had an incredibly sophisticated knowledge of plants. At the Schöningen site in Germany, alongside the animal bones, researchers found evidence of over 200 edible plants, berries, nuts, even tree bark.
So they were carefully balancing their diet. They weren't just mindless meat eaters, they were botanists, too.
They mastered their environment.
And you can't master your environment without technology. This is where I think the deep dive gets really exciting. They moved beyond the basic Oldowan tools of Homo erectus and started using Acheulean tools.
Which is a huge leap in craftsmanship. They were creating these symmetrical hand axes that were thinner, lighter, and much more effective.
But it's not just the shape of the tool, it's how they made them. The sources talk about hierarchical organization. They used prepared platforms.
Right. Instead of just smashing rocks together wherever they found them, they used table-like stone slabs. They would bring their raw materials to this specific spot to manufacture the tools.
Which shows incredible foresight. It's a dedicated workspace. It's a factory floor.
It is. But the absolute pinnacle of their technology, and truly a crucial aha moment in human evolution, is the spears of Schöningen.
Oh, this completely changed how I view this era. We are talking about the discovery of 9 wooden spears, perfectly preserved.
Made of spruce and pine, up to 2.5 meters long.
And the specs on these spears are insane. They aren't just sharpened sticks. They analyzed the center of gravity, and they were balanced exactly like modern track and field javelins, weight forward.
Which means they were designed for flight. Experimental archaeologists actually tested replicas, and they could be thrown accurately up to 35 meters.
That is standoff weaponry. You don't have to be within stomping distance of the rhino anymore. You can strike from a distance.
It lowers the mortality rate for the hunters. But there's another piece of tech here that shows a massive leap in cognitive ability. Hafting.
Right, hafting, attaching a stone point to a wooden stick.
It sounds so simple to us today, but think about the steps involved. You have to conceptualize a final product that doesn't exist in nature. You take stone, you take wood, and then you need a binding agent, like resin or animal sinew, to fuse them together.
One of the spears they found even had attachment points on both ends.
Hmm.
It's combinatorial technology. It requires a level of abstract thought that is just undeniably human.
Absolutely.
So we have these brilliant engineers, these coordinated hunters.
Yeah.
But did they have what we would call culture? Did they have an appreciation for aesthetics, or was it all just survival?
Well, let's look at their living spaces first. At Terra Amata in France, there is evidence of basic shelters. We're talking structures roughly 3 meters by 3.5 meters, made with rock foundations and roofs constructed from branches. They were using them seasonally.
Building their own homes. And inside those homes, or at least in their communities, they were making art.
Yes. We find simple patterns engraved into rock and bone, and these patterns have no functional purpose. You don't carve a geometric pattern into a bone to make it cut better. It's pure symbolism.
And the jewelry. They found perforated sponge fossils in Europe that were likely threaded and worn as beads.
Which implies a concept of self. You wear jewelry to decorate yourself, to signal something to your group.
And they were heavily into color, specifically red ochre. At that Terra Auta site, they found 70 pieces of ochre in different shades: red, yellow, brown, orange.
And we know from other sites that they sometimes heated the ochre to change its chemical structure and make the red more vibrant. That implies a really strong preference for color and decoration.
If you are decorating yourself and planning hunts and building complex tools, you have to be able to communicate.
Right.
So, did Heidelberg man have language?
The physical evidence strongly suggests they did. We found the hyoid bone. That's the little bone in the throat that supports the tongue. In Heidelbergensis, it was well developed and very similar to ours. Also, their middle ear bones were tuned to the exact same frequencies as human speech.
So the hardware to speak and hear language was there. But what about the brain power?
This is my favorite detail. We can actually look at their teeth to understand their brains.
Right, the striations.
Yes. When they used stone tools to cut meat, they would often hold the meat in their teeth and pull. Occasionally, the stone tool would scrape the enamel. Those scratch marks show that they were predominantly right-handed.
And handedness is tied to brain lateralization.
Exactly. Right-handedness correlates heavily with the left hemisphere of the brain being dominant. And the left hemisphere is exactly where the language processing centers are located.
That is brilliant. So they have the throat anatomy, the ear tuning, and the brain structure for speech. They were almost certainly talking to each other.
Coordinating those elephant hunts wouldn't have been possible without it.
Okay, there is one last piece of evidence that I think really seals the deal on their humanity. And it's a bit dark, but it's profound. The site in Spain, Cima de los Huesos.
The pit of bones.
Yeah, deep inside a cave system, at the bottom of a vertical shaft, researchers found the remains of 28 individuals all together.
And it's not a situation where they all just fell in by accident?
No, statistically that makes no sense.
Right, and there are no marks from predators dragging them down there. The conclusion that most experts have reached is that these individuals were placed there by their community.
Yeah.
They were burying their dead.
Which changes everything. If you are disposing of your dead in a specific communal place, it implies sentimentality, grief.
Maybe even a belief system about the afterlife.
It just makes them feel so close to us.
Yeah.
Which leads to the ultimate question. If they were this advanced, this adaptable, how did their story end? Why aren't they around anymore?
Well, the truth is they didn't go extinct in the traditional sense. They didn't just die out. They evolved.
Right.
The populations that were in the north dealing with the ice ages in Europe, they adapted further to that extreme cold. Over hundreds of thousands of years, they likely became the Neanderthals.
And the populations in the south, the ones that stayed in Africa?
They faced different environmental pressures, adapted differently, and likely became Homo sapiens.
Us. So this mysterious, confusing species from the muddle in the middle, they aren't some dead-end branch. They're likely our direct grandfather and grandmother.
Exactly. They are the common ancestral link.
It's incredible. I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over today. We spend so much time looking at these dry bones in glass museum cases, trying to measure brow ridges and teeth. But imagine standing on a hillside in Germany 400,000 years ago.
Just watching them.
Right. You look down toward the marsh, and you see a group of people. They've painted themselves with vibrant red ochre. They're holding perfectly balanced wooden spears. They are communicating, speaking in a language you can almost recognize, planning a coordinated attack on a massive rhino.
They have distinct jewelry, they have families, they have a designated place to mourn their dead.
Exactly. They have plans for the future. If you were standing there watching them live,
Yeah.
would you really call them a different species? Or would you just see a different, slightly older version of us?
That is the big question.
It really is. Something to think about next time you look in the mirror. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
See you next time.